The billionaire was supposed to be dead. Elena Reyes dipped the cloth into warm water, wringing it carefully between her fingers. Steam curled up, ghost-like, into the dim light of the decaying room. The man before her, silent, unmoving, was barely a shadow of the powerful figure the world had known. Victor Hale. He lay still, his body thin and fragile, bones stark against his dark skin. His features, once bold and magnetic, were hollowed by betrayal and time. Yet, even now, Elena could see the man he had been, the strong jawline, the high cheekbones, the stubborn cut of his mouth. Beauty faded by suffering, but not erased. She worked in silence, passing the cloth gently over his skin, tracing the map of scars and bruises he carried. Some old, some new. Evidence of survival. Evidence of cruelty. They had left him here, not strangers, but those who should have loved him. His stepmother. His stepbrother. And worst of all, his wife. They had planned it together. The ones he trusted most. They stripped him of his empire, his name, his life, and left him to rot in silence. As Elena bathed him, her fingers trembling slightly against his fever-warm skin, she found herself whispering, "I'm sorry," though she knew he couldn't hear her. Or so she thought. His hand twitched. Elena froze, the cloth slipping from her fingers into the water basin. Slowly, painfully, his eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes not clouded with sickness but burning with something fierce, something terrifyingly alive. "You have to help me," he rasped, the words barely more than breath. His voice, though weak, carried the weight of command, of desperation. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She leaned closer, the scent of soap and antiseptic filling the space between them. "Who did this to you?" she asked, barely able to force the words out. His mouth twisted, not quite a smile, something darker, rawer. "My family," he whispered. "My wife." The grief and rage laced through those two words were enough to make Elena's chest ache. He tried to lift his hand again, weak fingers brushing against her wrist, a touch so light it could have been imagined. But it wasn't. It was real. A spark of human connection in a room built for forgetting. Elena swallowed hard, blinking back a sting in her eyes she hadn't expected. She covered his hand with hers, squeezing gently, grounding him. "I see you," the touch said. "You are not gone. You're safe now," she said quietly. A lie, but one she needed him to believe. One she needed to believe herself. His eyes stayed locked on hers, searching, weighing, trusting. It was not the way she expected to fall into something larger than herself. But in that moment, under the heavy silence and broken walls, something shifted, something fragile and real. She would not abandon him. Not like they had. Elena sat by the bedside long after Victor's eyes slid shut again, his body surrendering to exhaustion. But not before that look, that fragile, burning connection, passed between them. She leaned back in the chair, silent, letting the night curl around them. She hadn't told anyone about that day. About the accident. No one knew she had been there, driving home on the winding country road, when she spotted the wreckage smoldering by the tree line. She hadn't thought, she had acted. A car flipped, half crushed, flames licking the twisted metal. A man slumped inside, blood streaking his face, broken and still breathing. She had pulled him out with her bare hands, his body limp and impossibly heavy, dragging him away from the burning shell. She didn't recognize him then, not Victor Hale the billionaire, just a man who was about to die if she didn't do something. It wasn't until later, when she cleaned the blood from his face in her tiny, crumbling apartment, that she realized who he was. The next morning, the news broke, Victor Hale dead in a tragic accident. His stepbrother, David Hale, and his wife, Vanessa, at the funeral, grieving with perfect faces, empty eyes. Moving swiftly to control his assets. Victor was supposed to be dead. And Elena was supposed to pretend she didn't know otherwise. But she couldn't. Not after the way he had clung to life, the way he had fought even unconscious, refusing to let go. Now, months later, she sat by his side, still caring for him in secret, still hiding him from a world that believed he was nothing more than a memory. Elena looked at him, sleeping fitfully, and felt something unfamiliar twist inside her, a slow, coiling tenderness that had nothing to do with duty. He wasn't just a patient. Not anymore. Victor shifted in the bed, murmuring something she couldn't catch. His brow furrowed, jaw tightening. Nightmares. She stood, smoothing the sweat-damp hair from his forehead, her hand lingering. His skin was warm, fevered, but under her touch, he relaxed slightly, the tension bleeding from his face. She whispered, so softly it was almost a secret, "I'm here." When morning came, he woke slowly, blinking against the pale light that filtered through the cracked window. Elena was at his side instantly, offering water. He drank, slower this time, his hand trembling as he gripped the cup. When he lowered it, his voice was hoarse but steady. "You saved me," he said. She froze. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. Not a question. A statement. A truth. "You remember?" she asked. Victor nodded once, carefully. Flames. Pain. Then, you. Elena felt her cheeks flush, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You would have died if I hadn't found you." A ghost of a smile tugged at his mouth, not joy, but something sharper. "They all think I'm dead." She nodded. His eyes darkened. "Vanessa," he said. His wife's name fell from his lips like poison. "She's moved on," Elena said, voice quiet but steady. "With David." Victor closed his eyes, breathing slowly. For a moment, she thought he would shatter, but then he exhaled, long and low, and when he opened his eyes again, they burned. "Of course she has," he said. "She was always ambitious." Elena didn't know what to say. What could you say to a man betrayed by blood and bond? "I'm sorry," she said finally, meaning it with her whole heart. Victor looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, she saw not just the wreckage of what he had been, but the man beneath it all. Proud. Sharp. Dangerous in the way only those who have lost everything can be. But there was something else, too, something softer, something wounded. "You're not like them," he said. Elena blinked. "I'm just a nurse." He shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. "No. You're the only reason I'm alive." The word struck something deep inside her, fragile and aching. She swallowed. "You need rest. Food. Physical therapy. And revenge," he added, voice a whisper now, almost tender. Elena gave a small, almost broken smile. "One thing at a time." Victor leaned his head back, eyes closing again. But this time, he wasn't falling into a nightmare. His face was calm, almost peaceful. Trust. It hung between them, delicate, dangerous, undeniable. Elena sat back, watching him breathe, feeling the slow shift in the air. This was no longer just survival. This was the beginning of something neither of them could walk away from. Victor's recovery was slow, and it was brutal. Each day was a test, a war waged quietly between body and will. Elena watched him fight it. Watched him grit his teeth and force muscles too long and used to respond. She moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting his IVs, spoon-feeding him thin broth she cooked herself, coaxing sips of water between his parched lips. At first, he said little. His strength was spent on surviving. But his eyes. They spoke. Every time Elena came near, every time she touched his arm to shift his position or steadied his hand when it trembled, he watched her. Not with suspicion. Not with mistrust. With something deeper. Recognition. She was not his enemy. She was his anchor. One morning, after a night of shallow sleep and whispered nightmares, Victor stirred as sunlight cracked through the window. Elena was already there, dressed neatly in her simple uniform, her hair pulled back tight from her glowing face. She moved quietly, drawing a glass of water from the table. As she leaned closer, he spoke, the first full sentence since waking. "You've been here the whole time," he rasped. Elena smiled softly. "I told you. I'm not going anywhere." Victor lifted his hand, slow, deliberate, and for the first time, the motion wasn't accidental, wasn't a twitch or a spasm. He touched her wrist. A feather-light graze of calloused fingers over smooth skin. "Why?" he asked. Elena's throat tightened. She wasn't sure if she could explain it. She wasn't even sure if she understood it. The day she found him broken and bleeding by the side of the road, something had shifted inside her. A part of her that had always been cautious, guarded, had cracked wide open. "You didn't deserve what happened to you," she said quietly. Victor's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with the weight of memory. He closed them briefly, breathing in the moment, then opened them again. "They tried to erase me," he said. His voice was stronger now, his tone threaded with steel. "David. Vanessa. My father's wife. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to bury me." Elena's fingers, still caught beneath his hand, squeezed gently. "Let them think you're buried," she whispered. "You'll rise again." For a moment, they just stared at each other, the nurse and the man the world believed dead, bound not by duty, but by something more fragile, more dangerous. Trust. And underneath it, something else beginning to stir. Something neither of them dared name. That afternoon, as Elena changed the sheets and bathed him, Victor fought harder to sit upright, grunting with the effort. "I can help," he muttered, pushing against the bed frame. Elena smiled, setting the clean linens aside to steady him. Slowly, she coached. "Your muscles need time." Victor's hands trembled as he pushed himself higher, grimacing, but he didn't give up. Sweat beaded along his brow, but his mouth tightened into a familiar, stubborn line. He was a man used to fighting wars, boardroom or otherwise. His body was a battlefield now, and he had no intention of losing. Elena sat beside him on the edge of the bed, her hand just lightly on his back, steadying but not forcing. "You're doing better every day," she said. Victor gave a small, humorless huff. "Feels like crawling through mud." "You're alive," she reminded him. "That's a victory." His eyes found hers again, and for a moment, the tired lines of his face softened. In the quiet between them, something passed, unspoken but understood. He wasn't just alive because he fought. He was alive because she had fought for him. As the days turned into weeks, the old Victor, the powerful, magnetic man the world once feared and envied, began to resurface. It wasn't just in the way he pushed himself to walk, step by trembling step across the battered room. It was in the way he looked at her, not as a nurse, not as a servant. As an equal. As the woman who had dragged him out of the ashes when everyone else had left him for dead. Elena noticed it too, the change in him. The way he listened when she spoke. The way he leaned into her touch, not from weakness but from trust. One night, as a storm battered the old estate, rattling windows and howling through the cracked walls, Elena lit a small oil lamp and sat beside his bed. Victor was propped up on pillows now, his body still frail but his presence. The storm had passed. The house, damp and creaking, exhaled under the morning sun. Water streaked down the cracked windows, and the smell of rain soaked the air, clean, earthy, like a memory of something lost. Victor sat propped up against a mound of thin pillows, his body still frail but his mind sharper than it had been in months. His dark eyes followed Elena as she moved quietly around the room, changing bandages, refreshing water, folding worn blankets with careful hands. He studied her, not just the smooth economy of her movements, but the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her mouth pressed into a thoughtful line. There was strength there, but not the kind the world admired. Hers was quieter. Harder. The kind forged in silence and sacrifice. "Elena," he said, his voice low but steady. She turned to him, one hand still smoothing the blanket. "Sit with me," he said. She hesitated only a moment, then crossed the room and lowered herself into the old chair beside the bed, her knees brushing the mattress. Victor shifted slightly, grimacing as pain lanced up his spine. Elena moved to help, but he shook his head. "I need to do it myself," he said, not unkindly. She sat back, hands folded loosely in her lap. For a long moment, they just sat there, the hush between them stretching, growing warm. "I remember the crash," Victor said finally. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged over stone. "Not everything. Flashes." Elena said nothing, sensing he wasn't looking for reassurances or apologies. "I remember waking up. I was bleeding, trapped." His jaw tightened. "I didn't expect to survive." He turned his head to look at her, and the force of that gaze made her breath catch. "And then you were there," he said. Elena swallowed. "I couldn't just leave you." A shadow passed over his face, something darker than pain. "They did." He didn't have to say their names. She knew them now, David, Vanessa, and the stepmother who had always despised him. "They planned it," Victor said. "David and Vanessa, together now, aren't they?" Elena nodded, her throat tight. "They loved what I had more than they loved me." He gave a low, humorless chuckle. "David envied me my whole life. Vanessa, she saw an opportunity. They didn't just want my money. They wanted me gone. Forgotten." He looked down at his hands, the hands that had once signed deals worth millions, now trembling from weakness. "They left me to die," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you didn't." Elena felt something ache deep in her chest, a twist of sorrow and anger on his behalf. She reached out before she could stop herself, her hand brushing his. Warm. Steady. Real. Victor looked at their hands, then up at her, something raw and unguarded in his gaze. "Why?" he asked. It wasn't curiosity. It was something deeper. A plea for understanding. Elena let out a slow breath. "Because no one saved my father," she said quietly. Victor's brows drew together, but he said nothing, waiting. "My father got sick when I was 16. Cancer. We didn't have money for the treatment he needed." She smiled bitterly. "Family promised they'd help. Friends promised too. But when it came time, everyone disappeared." Victor's fingers tightened slightly around hers. "I watched him die slowly," she whispered. "Watched him fight for every breath, alone. I promised myself if I ever had the chance to save someone, really save them, I would." Victor didn't speak. He just looked at her, really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time, not just the nurse who bathed and fed him, but the woman who had carried him back from the edge of death. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Elena shook her head. "I'm not. It taught me what loyalty really means." Their hands stayed together, neither pulling away. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was full, of shared hurt, shared survival, shared understanding. Victor leaned back slowly, his body still weak but his voice stronger. "When I take it all back," he said, "when I rise again. I want you with me." Elena blinked, startled. "I'm just a nurse," she said, though her voice was softer, uncertain. "No," Victor said, his tone firm. "You're the only person who didn't leave me when I was nothing." He squeezed her hand gently. "I need someone I can trust," he said. "Not just to survive, to live." Elena felt the heat rise in her chest, in her throat, in her eyes. She didn't trust easily. She had built her life on walls and caution. But sitting here, in the wreckage of a life once grand, she realized she already had trusted him, not because of his money or power, but because of his fight. Because she saw herself in him. She nodded slowly. "I'll stay." Victor smiled, not the cold, practiced smile of a billionaire, but something real, something that belonged only to her. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the remnants of the storm. Inside, something else was rebuilding, slow, careful, and unstoppable. For days after that conversation, something shifted between them. It wasn't in anything grand or loud. It was in the quiet ways they moved around each other, how Victor's eyes found Elena first when he woke, how her hand lingered a second longer on his when she adjusted his pillows or helped him sit upright. There were no declarations. No confessions. Just being. Victor's body, once wasted and frail, began to obey him again, slowly. He worked through the tremors, the aches, the stiffness, refusing to surrender to the weakness that had once held him captive. Elena guided him, coached him, pushing just enough, never too much. She celebrated the smallest victories with a soft smile, a whispered, "Good, you're stronger today." Sometimes, Victor caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, that same soft, determined look on her face. It stirred something deep in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. One afternoon, Victor insisted on walking. Not just the few steps he had managed before, but across the entire room. "No chair," he said when Elena reached for one to steady him. "I have you." Elena hesitated, then nodded once, stepping to his side. He rose slowly, using only the bed frame for support. His jaw clenched, breath hissing through his teeth, but he stood, proud and tall despite the tremble in his legs. Elena slipped her arm under his, her hand resting lightly on his back. "Easy," she murmured. Victor glanced at her, and for a moment, the stubborn pride in his eyes softened, not in defeat, but in acceptance. Together, they moved, slow, deliberate steps, Victor leaning just enough to accept her support without losing his own fight for control. When they reached the opposite wall, Victor let out a sharp breath, half a laugh, half a growl of triumph. Elena's face lit up, and before she could think, she squeezed his hand. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with something she didn't name. Victor's hand didn't let go. He turned slightly, still breathing hard, and their eyes locked, close now, too close. The air between them seemed to shift, heavy and charged. His fingers brushed hers, not by accident. Deliberate. Testing. Elena's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't pull away. Couldn't. Victor leaned in slightly, not touching, but there, close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin, see the faint scar near his temple, the slight stubble growing along his jawline. "I'm not alive because I'm strong," he said, voice low and rough. "I'm alive because you didn't give up on me." Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to deny it, to deflect, but the truth sat between them, undeniable. She didn't give up. On him. On them. That night, after Victor managed a few more steps and ate more solid food than he had in months, Elena sat near the window, the old house creaking softly in the wind. Victor watched her from the bed, the way the lamplight framed her face, casting her in gold and shadow. She looked tired, but strong. Alone, but whole. "How long will you stay?" he asked suddenly. Elena turned, startled by the quietness of his voice. "As long as you need me," she said. Victor sat up straighter, ignoring the protest of his muscles. "I don't just need you to help me walk," he said, his tone shifting, serious now. "I need you to stand beside me." Elena frowned slightly, cautious. "Victor. When I take my life back," he cut her off, "I'll be walking into a war." Elena said nothing, just watched him, steady as ever. "I won't trust anyone else," he said, softer now, as if speaking a truth even he wasn't sure he should say. Elena stood and crossed the room, stopping at the edge of his bed. She looked down at him, at the man who had once ruled boardrooms with a glance, now offering her not power, not money, but faith. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly. Victor's mouth twitched, not a smile, but something more vulnerable. "You should be." Elena shook her head. "You're not the only one who's lost something." Victor tilted his head. "Tell me." Elena hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that their knees brushed. "My father died because no one fought for him," she said. "I've spent my whole life fighting for people who had no one else." She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand, feather light. "I'm not about to stop now." Victor's hand turned under hers, their palms meeting, a slow, careful movement. Not desperation. Not weakness. Choice. They sat like that, neither moving, neither speaking, just being, as the last light faded and the house settled around them. A pact unspoken. A promise made in the silence. The first call was the hardest. Victor sat by the cracked window, hunched slightly in the old chair Elena had helped him move there. Sunlight cut through the dirty glass, laying stripes of gold across the worn wood floor. In his hand was the old, battered mobile phone Elena had found tucked away in a drawer, the only lifeline to his past life. He stared at it, thumb hovering over the buttons, his jaw tight. Elena stood nearby, watching without pressure. Without judgment. Just, there. Victor finally pressed the number. Not many people he trusted enough to call. Most of the names from his past were tainted, friends who had smiled at his downfall, partners who had stayed silent. But there were a few. And if he was going to take his life back, he needed allies. The line rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Victor's hand trembled, whether from weakness or anticipation, he wasn't sure, but then the call connected. "Who is this?" a voice snapped, cautious, wary. Victor breathed in, slow and deep. "It's Victor." Silence. "Victor Hale," the voice whispered. Victor smiled grimly. "The one and only." Another beat of silence, then, "Jesus." "We thought," a sharp inhale. "Victor, where are you?" "Alive," Victor said. "That's all." "You need to know for now." "I need help." A low chuckle crackled through the phone. "Thought you'd never ask." Victor ended the call, his hand lowering slowly. He closed his eyes, breathing through the rush of adrenaline and the sharp stab of memory. When he opened them, Elena was still there, arms folded, quiet and steady. "Someone you can trust?" she asked. Victor nodded once. "For now." Elena walked over, kneeling beside his chair, one hand resting lightly on his knee. "You don't have to do this alone." Victor looked down at her, really looked, the soft glow of the sunlight tracing the curve of her cheek, the firm line of her mouth. There was no fear in her eyes. Only certainty. Loyalty. Something inside him loosened, something he hadn't even realized had been clenched tight. "I'm not used to asking for help," he admitted. Elena smiled, small and sad. "Most strong people aren't." Victor's hand moved without thinking, his fingers brushing her jaw, tracing the line of her face. She froze but didn't pull away. Neither spoke. The distance between them, so carefully maintained, was gone now. Victor's thumb traced the edge of her mouth, slow, deliberate, memorizing. Elena's breath hitched, her eyes flickering down to his lips before darting back up to his eyes. "God help me," Victor thought, "I want this. I want her." But he didn't close the distance. Not yet. Instead, he let his hand fall away slowly, his fingers brushing hers as he pulled back. Elena stood, smoothing her hands down the front of her uniform, composing herself. "You need to get stronger," she said, her voice low but steady. Victor smirked, the first true smile in months, and leaned back in the chair. Then you'd better keep pushing me. That evening, Victor sat at the small wooden table Elena had dragged into the room, a crude map spread before him. Names were scribbled in her careful, neat handwriting, old allies, business contacts, trusted associates he could call upon. These three, Elena said, tapping the names, still work at Hale Enterprises. Victor nodded. And they were loyal. As far as I know. Elena straightened. You'll need evidence to fight back. Proof of what David and Vanessa did. Victor's mouth twisted. They were smart. They made it look like an accident. I need more than proof. I need leverage. Elena tapped her pen against her lip, thoughtful. I can help, she said. Victor arched a brow. How? You're a nurse, not a spy. Elena smiled, a real smile, mischievous and sharp. You'd be surprised what you learn when no one notices you're in the room. Victor laughed, low and genuine, and it was a sound he hadn't heard from himself in far too long. All right, Nurse Reyes, he said, his voice a low rumble. Let's see what you can do. Elena leaned closer, her fingers brushing his as they studied the map together. They stayed like that long after the lamp burned low, two soldiers planning a war no one knew was coming, two hearts beating just a little too fast, too close. Neither said it. Neither dared. But it was there, between them. The beginning of everything. The knock was soft. Too soft. Victor's eyes snapped open. He sat up slowly in the creaky bed, muscles taut, ears straining. Another knock. Elena, sitting cross-legged at the table, looked up from the map they'd been poring over all morning. Her brows knit in a frown. She pushed her chair back silently, moving toward the window. Victor beat her to it with a subtle shake of his head. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, grimacing against the strain, and gestured for her to stay back. She obeyed, but her body was tight, alert. The knock came again, this time slightly louder. Victor's mind raced. Only a handful of people even knew he was alive, and fewer still knew where he was. None of them would have come without calling first. He grabbed the old cane leaning against the bed, an ugly, heavy thing Elena had found for him. Not much of a weapon, but it was solid wood. Enough for a warning. Victor hobbled toward the door, slower than he wanted but steady. Elena moved silently behind him, stopping just out of sight. She caught his eye, and in her hand, he noticed, a small scalpel she'd tucked into her sleeve. Just in case. He nodded. Another knock, sharp, urgent. Victor's hand hovered near the doorknob. Who is it? His voice was low, controlled. Silence. Then, finally, a man's voice, smooth, almost too casual. Delivery for Mr. Hale. Victor's stomach turned. No one used his real name. Not here. He exchanged a glance with Elena. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Wrong house, Victor said. More silence. Then the unmistakable sound, the metallic click of a gun being cocked. Victor didn't wait. He grabbed the edge of the heavy wooden dresser nearby and shoved it hard against the door. It screeched across the floor, jamming under the handle. A thud against the wood as whoever was outside tried to push in. Elena didn't scream. Didn't panic. She was already moving, helping brace the dresser with her shoulder. Back window, Victor hissed, nodding toward the rear of the house. Elena nodded, already calculating, already scanning. The house wasn't built for siege, an old farmhouse with thin walls and fewer exits. But there was a back door near the kitchen. If they moved fast. Another slam at the front door. Victor gritted his teeth against the pain in his legs and motioned for her to go. He followed as fast as he could manage. In the kitchen, the light was dim, the back door slightly swollen from old wood and humidity. Elena struggled with the lock, fingers slick with sweat. Victor pressed against the wall, listening. Boots. More than one set, crunching on the front steps. "Elena," he said, just as she wrenched the door open. Fresh air hit them, hot, heavy, and thick with the scent of coming rain. Victor limped after her, into the overgrown garden, the tall grass whispering around their ankles. A shout from the front. Gunfire, a sharp crack, split the air. Elena grabbed Victor's arm, steadying him as they ducked low, moving fast toward the trees that ringed the property. Victor's heart pounded, not just from exertion, but from the raw realization, they found me. He stumbled once, but Elena was there, her hand tight around his waist, hauling him upright without a word. They pushed through the brush, the forest thick and dark. No path. No plan. Just survival. Branches tore at Victor's clothes, sweat poured down his back, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. Not now. They didn't stop until they were deep enough into the woods that the house was just a memory. Victor leaned against a tree, panting hard, and Elena crouched beside him, scanning the trees for movement. Silence. Only the chirp of birds and the whisper of wind. Victor closed his eyes briefly. "Thank you," he said, voice hoarse. Elena shook her head. "Don't thank me yet." She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small folded piece of paper, the map they had worked on. Still with them. Still their best shot. Victor straightened slowly, wincing. "They know I'm alive." Elena's jaw tightened. "Then it's not just about getting back what's yours anymore." Victor met her eyes, dark, fierce, determined. "It's about survival." He nodded once, grim and resolute. "We find Trent," he said. "We regroup. We fight." Elena nodded, slipping the map into his hand. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting touch, but it grounded him more than anything. They didn't say the rest. "We do this together. Always." Later, as they sat hidden in the trees, catching their breath, Victor shifted slightly, his leg cramping. Without a word, Elena moved closer, pressing her side against his, sharing warmth, sharing breath. Victor turned his head, his face inches from hers. He could see every detail. The flecks of gold in her dark eyes, the line of her jaw, the way her lips parted just slightly when she breathed. Elena didn't move. Neither did he. The air between them tightened, charged, thrumming with something they couldn't name, couldn't deny. Victor's hand lifted, almost without thought, brushing a curl from her forehead. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, trusting, unguarded. Victor leaned in, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. But just before their lips met, a crack of a branch somewhere nearby made them both freeze. Elena's eyes snapped open. Victor pulled back, jaw tight. Not now. Not yet. They had a war to win first. The old town was smaller than Victor remembered, a handful of dusty roads, tin-roofed buildings, and a forgotten air that spoke of people who had long since given up on leaving. Elena guided him through the winding back streets, keeping her hand firm at his back, steadying him without words. The forest had given them cover, but the town was eyes. Watchers. Secrets. Victor leaned heavily on a crude wooden cane Elena had found. His body was still rebuilding itself, but his mind was sharper than ever. At the far edge of the town stood a crumbling house with peeling white paint and a broken gate. Trent's safe house. If it could even be called that. Victor raised a hand and knocked twice, sharp, deliberate. A pause. A rattle. The door cracked open. Samuel Trent stood there, older, heavier than Victor remembered, but his sharp eyes hadn't dulled. "God damn," Trent whispered, pulling the door wider. "You really are alive." Victor stepped inside without a word, Elena close behind. The house was bare, stripped down to essentials, a table, 2 chairs, a mattress on the floor. Paranoia lived here. Survival. Trent locked the door behind them and turned, taking them both in. "And who's this?" he asked, glancing at Elena. Victor's voice was calm but left no room for argument. "Someone I trust." Trent nodded, slowly, assessing her. Elena met his stare without flinching. Smart girl, Victor thought. Stronger than anyone I ever knew. Trent motioned toward the table. "Sit." Victor lowered himself into the chair, his legs stiff and aching. Elena hovered near his side, silent, watchful. Trent poured a glass of water and pushed it across the table. "You're dead, Victor. Legally, socially, financially, dead." Victor took the glass, sipping carefully. "Then we have an advantage." Trent smirked, leaning back in his chair. "You planning to haunt them?" Victor's mouth curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Something like that." Trent sobered. "David and Vanessa have everything. They've made it look legitimate, the accident, the will, the transfers." Victor glanced at Elena, then back at Trent. "There's always a crack. We just have to find it." Trent nodded. "You'll need proof. A witness. Something they can't bury." Victor leaned back, exhaustion weighing heavy on him, but his voice was iron. "I have a witness." Trent's brows lifted. Elena didn't flinch. Victor turned toward her fully, his hand finding hers under the table, a silent question, a silent apology. Her fingers curled around his in answer. "I need you," Victor said, voice low, "just for her." Elena's throat worked, but she nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." Trent watched the exchange, something flickering in his eyes. Respect. Understanding. Victor released her hand gently and faced Trent again. "Start digging. I want everything, every transaction, every false signature, every dirty secret." Trent grinned. "Now you're talking." That night, while Trent worked on a battered laptop, Victor and Elena sat near the broken window, the moonlight soft on their faces. Elena was quiet, thoughtful, her hands folded in her lap. Victor studied her, the slope of her shoulders, the quiet strength in her posture. "You know you can walk away," he said. Elena turned her head, meeting his gaze. "I know." Victor shifted closer, the space between them charged again. "I won't think less of you," he said. Elena gave a small smile, sad and true. "You'd be wrong to." Victor's hand lifted, brushing a stray curl from her forehead, lingering against her skin. "You saved me," he murmured. "You saved yourself," she said. Their faces were close, too close. Victor's breath hitched. He leaned in, slowly, giving her time to stop him. She didn't. When it was light, a whisper of a kiss, a question. Elena answered, her hands slow and careful, a promise written in silence. When they finally broke apart, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "We have a war to fight," he whispered. Elena's smile was fierce. "We'll win. Together." They moved before dawn. The town was still asleep, swallowed by the heavy dark. Only the wind stirred, whispering through empty streets as Victor, Elena, and Trent slipped out of the safe house, bags slung over their shoulders, tension coiled tight in their bodies. Victor's leg ached, but he ignored it, leaning less on the cane, forcing his body to move. Elena was close, not hovering, but near enough that he could feel her presence, solid, steady, his anchor. Trent led the way, cutting through narrow alleys and side streets. They kept to the shadows, where even the stray dogs and early risers wouldn't spot them. At the far edge of town, hidden between two abandoned warehouses, a beat-up sedan waited, dusty, nondescript, and perfect. Trent threw the driver's door open and climbed in. "Move," he hissed. Victor limped toward the passenger side. Elena's hand caught his. "Wait," she whispered. Victor turned, frowning. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, worn charm on a leather cord, a simple piece, carved wood polished smooth from handling. "For luck," she said. Victor stared at it, the moment oddly tender amidst the tension. He closed his hand around it, feeling the small warmth of it seep into his skin. He slipped it over his neck, under his shirt, the charm resting against his chest. Their eyes locked, the world narrowing to just the two of them for a breath. Then Trent swore under his breath. Go, they're here." Headlights. Two SUVs turning the corner fast, tires squealing against asphalt. Victor shoved Elena toward the back seat. She didn't argue, diving in as Victor slid beside her, slamming the door. Trent gunned the engine, the old car roaring to life, lurching onto the road. Gunshots cracked through the silence, sharp, terrifying. Elena ducked instinctively, her body half covering Victor's as Trent swerved hard, dodging the first SUV. Victor pulled her close, shielding her as best he could. The scent of her hair, the heat of her body, even here, even now, grounded him. They sped through the streets, weaving in and out of alleys, tires skidding on dirt and gravel. "They won't stop," Trent growled. "They'll chase us to hell." Victor's hand found Elena's, gripping tight. "Then we give them hell first." Elena's mouth twisted into a grim smile. Together. The SUV behind them caught up, too close, and slammed into the back of their car, the metal groaning under the impact. Trent cursed, fighting the wheel. Victor turned, hand still gripping Elena's, eyes burning. "Brace yourself," he warned her. Trent jerked the car sideways, a brutal swerve that threw them all against the doors. Elena's shoulder hit the window hard, but she didn't cry out. The SUV tried to match the move, failed, and skidded out, crashing into a telephone pole with a screech of metal and glass. Trent didn't slow. He barreled down an old access road, the trees closing in around them. Victor shifted, turning to Elena. "You okay?" His voice was rough, urgent. She nodded, breathless but steady. "You?" He managed a grim smile. "Still breathing." She smiled back, tight but real. "Good." Another SUV loomed behind them, relentless. Trent snarled under his breath. "We're not outrunning them in this heap." Victor's mind raced. Options flickered and died. Fight or flight, neither looked good. "Stop the car," Victor said. Trent blinked. "You're kidding." "Stop the damn car," Victor barked. Trent cursed again but obeyed, slamming the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, kicking up dust and rocks. Victor grabbed the door handle. "Stay low." Elena's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Victor." He turned, their faces inches apart. "Trust me." She hesitated, then nodded once, her eyes fierce. Victor opened the door and stepped out into the pre-dawn gloom, standing tall despite the ache in his body. The SUV screeched to a halt a few yards away. Two men climbed out, armed, moving fast. Victor raised his hands slowly, making himself a target. Behind him, Elena slipped from the car low, circling wide. They didn't see her. They were too focused on Victor. One man raised his gun. Victor didn't flinch. A sharp crack split the air, not a gunshot, but a rock, hurled by Elena, smashing into the gunman's arm. He cursed, his shot going wild. Victor lunged, slamming his weight into the second man, driving him to the ground. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't clean. But it worked. Elena was there in an instant, grabbing the fallen gun, covering Victor as he scrambled up. The first man was recovering, lifting his gun again, but Elena's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't." Her hands were steady, the gun aimed dead at his chest. The man froze. Victor straightened slowly, breathing hard. He turned to look at Elena, really look, and felt something fierce twist in his chest. Not just gratitude. Not just trust. Something more. Something deeper. The first man dropped his weapon. Victor crossed to Elena, never taking his eyes off her. "You saved me again," he said, voice low. "You do the same," she answered, her voice just as soft. Victor reached for her hand, not fast, not urgent. Slow. Deliberate. She let him take it. Behind them, Trent shouted for them to move, but for a second longer, Victor and Elena just stood there, hand in hand, breath mingling in the cold morning air, a promise between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The city skyline cut sharp against the morning sky, a jagged promise of power and ruin. Victor hadn't seen it in nearly a year, not since the accident, not since betrayal carved him out of his own life. Now, as the car rumbled down the expressway, Elena's hand resting steady in his, he didn't feel like a ghost anymore. He felt alive. Beside him, Elena watched the skyline too, silent but present. There was no fear in her posture, no hesitation in her gaze. Only belief, in him, in them. Trent drove, jaw tight, eyes scanning the mirrors. "You sure about this, Vic?" he muttered. Victor's mouth tightened. "No." His fingers tightened around Elena's hand. "But it's the only way." They were headed to Hale Enterprises, to the Lion's Den. To the boardroom where David and Vanessa now sat, crowning themselves with what they'd stolen. Victor's empire. His name. It was time to take it back. Inside the lobby, security stiffened when they saw Victor, limping slightly but walking tall, head high. A dead man come back to life. Whispers chased them through the marble hallways. Victor pushed open the doors to the boardroom without waiting. Silence fell like a blade. David sat at the head of the long glass table, flanked by suited executives. Vanessa was at his right, flawless, cold, smug. The sight of Victor standing there, alive, breathing, undefeated, wiped the smugness clean off their faces. Victor tossed a thick file onto the table. It landed with a slap that echoed. "Proof," he said flatly. "Of fraud. Embezzlement. Conspiracy to commit murder." Gasps rippled around the table. David recovered first. He rose slowly, a mocking smile curling his lips. "This is absurd." Victor smiled, slow and deadly. Elena stood a step behind him, still and steady. Victor didn't need to say it. She was his witness, the one who had saved him, the one who had stayed. "The board will decide," Victor said. "After all, that's how we do things here." David laughed. "You think these people will choose you over me?" Victor didn't answer. He didn't have to. One by one, the board members opened the file. One by one, their faces changed, from confusion, to horror, to cold calculation. David's smile faltered. Vanessa reached for his arm, but he shook her off. Victor stepped forward, pain shooting up his leg, but he didn't falter. "You tried to bury me," he said quietly. "But I'm still here." He turned slightly, meeting Elena's eyes. "And I'm not alone." David sneered. "She's a nurse. What does she know about power?" Victor smiled again, real this time. "Everything you forgot." The vote wasn't close. Victor stood, spine straight despite the pain, as the board stripped David of his title, his shares, his dignity. Vanessa turned on him before it was over, trying to save herself, but it was too late. When the security guards escorted them out, Victor watched without a word. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was done. Later, in the quiet of Victor's old, now his again, office, Elena stood by the window, looking out at the city. Victor watched her, hands in his pockets, heart in his throat. "You don't have to stay," he said. Elena turned slowly, her face calm, her eyes fierce. "I know." Victor crossed to her, each step careful, deliberate. "You saved my life," he said. She smiled, small and real. "You saved yourself." He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "Stay anyway," he whispered. Elena's smile deepened. She stepped closer, so close he could feel the warmth of her body, the steady rhythm of her breath. "I wasn't going anywhere," she said. Victor leaned in. There was no hesitation. No fear. It was slow, and deep, and true. A kiss, and promise, and forever. When they broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against his. "No more battles," she murmured. Victor chuckled low in his chest. "Only victories." Outside, the city pulsed, ruthless, unyielding. But inside this room, there was only quiet. Only them. And the life they had fought, and bled, to win. 6 months later. The city outside Victor's penthouse window still pulsed and burned with ambition. But here, in the quiet glow of early morning, it felt distant, a hum, not a roar. Victor leaned against the balcony rail, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand, his dark skin kissed by the rising sun. Behind him, the sliding glass door opened with a soft scrape. He didn't turn, he didn't have to. Elena stepped onto the balcony barefoot, wrapped in one of his crisp white shirts. Her hair was loose, curling around her shoulders in soft waves. She moved to stand beside him, shoulder brushing his, the easy, familiar contact of two people who no longer needed permission to reach for each other. Victor handed her the cup without a word. She accepted it with a small smile, sipping slowly. Below them, the city stretched, wide and glittering. Above them, the sky broke into soft pinks and golds, a new day. "You're awake early," she murmured, voice still thick with sleep. Victor chuckled low. "Old habits." Elena glanced at him over the rim of the cup. "And the nightmares?" Victor shook his head. "Less now." He turned to her, really looked at her. "You help with that." She smiled, small and true. They stood like that for a while, watching the day unfold. Inside, the new empire they were building waited, businesses to rebuild, legacies to reforge. Together, they had restructured Hale Enterprises, burning out the rot, planting something stronger, something theirs. But for now, there was only this. Victor set the cup aside and reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. Elena leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked, voice soft. Victor smiled, brushing his lips against her hair. "No," he said honestly. "But now that we are, I'm never letting go." She tipped her head up, meeting his eyes, full of promise and fire. "Good," she said. "Because neither am I." Victor bent and pecked her. Slow and sure, the kind of peck that didn't need to rush, didn't need to prove anything. It just was. A promise made. A promise kept. Together. Always.